All right, we are going to get started here. We're going to be doing our inoculations of our normal culture media, so Culture Transfer Techniques Lab. One of the first things that you need to do is make sure to turn on the BACT/Cinerator. You can see one in the background right over there. There's actually one right next to us, and I'll show you guys that right now. And you can see it is awfully warm. That's glowing red hot, so that is getting up to its maximum temperature, which is about 440 degrees Celsius, I think. I'll have to double check that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start inoculating our media. And I'm just going to show you guys one of them, and not all the ones that I do, because that is boring and obnoxious, so I'm not going to do that. So we're going to start off with Serratia morsescens, and we're going to use our two inoculating instruments, which are a needle, like so. You can see it's got a point on the end, and a loop. So you can see it's got a loop on the end. Pretty simple. Okay. So first things first, we're going to inoculate the broth. For broth, we can use a loop or a needle. It doesn't matter because you can't hurt them. So I'm just going to go with the loop because that's easier. I'm going to first start off by taking my loop and sticking it in the BACT/Cinerator for a couple seconds and just letting it come out and cool down. I don't want to let it heat up too much because it doesn't really need to be in there very long. Just a couple seconds. So I've got our broth. You can see liquidy broth, like so, already pre-labeled. And we're going to grab some bacteria from the plate. So when I lift up the plate lid, I only want to grab a little tiny bit. Like I don't need to grab a huge amount. I don't need to lift it all the way off. Lift it all the way off, it exposes it to the outside atmosphere, and there's potential for contamination. I'm then going to take my tube. Typically, you want to hold it at about a 45-degree angle. Okay? And you're going to take off the cap with your dominant hand, and you're going to take the loop and put it in there and give it a nice swirl. Take the loop out, recap it, put the tube away, and then immediately flame your instrument. The reason why we do that right away is because we don't want to bring any outside bacteria into our working environment. We only want to transfer things to new media, and then everything else should remain as clean as possible. Now, when you do take this out, you need to let it cool for just a second. And the reason why is because it gets very, very hot. It gets very, very hot. And you can kill all the bacteria that you grab if you grab it really quick afterwards if you re-inoculate something with it. Now, the next one we're going to do is a slant. Slant, if you want to grow cultural characteristics, you want to use a needle, because if you use a loop, it's not going to work very well. So I recommend using a needle. A loop works really great if you just need a lot of bulk stuff. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to flame our instrument, basically heat it up to sterilize it. We're going to grab our slant, and so you can see it's on a slant bias, and we're just going to drag it along the surface of that slant very gently. So we're going to let this cool down. If you want to check to see if it's too hot, you can touch it to a piece of agar. If you don't hear a hiss, then you're good to go. I'm just going to grab a little bacteria. Okay. I'm going to take my cap off. I want to keep this at a 45-degree angle because this helps prevent bacteria from just falling in from the atmosphere. And I'm going to go along this slant and see if I can capture this appropriately. I'm going to go all the way down, gently rest it on there, and pull along the top in a straight line. Now, I was doing that on camera. That was a horrible straight line. But it was a straight line nonetheless, relatively straight. So, there we go. And then, of course, I'm going to recap and flame my instrument right away. You know what? This needle is not very good, so I'm going to switch it out for a different one. Because the next thing we're going to do is sim deep. Sim deeps take a while. Not so much that they take a while, they're just a little bit trickier because you need to make a nice straight stab line. So one of the things that you want to do is make sure that your needle is as straight as possible. If it's not very straight, you're going to get a bad stab line. So we want to try to make sure that it's straight before we do anything with it. So we're going to go ahead and flame it. Let it warm up. This is our sim deep. Now you can see it's not liquid, it's a solid. So it's easy to confuse with the broth if you don't just tip to the side to see if it's a broth or a solid. This is a semi-solid. So remember, it's kind of got a jelly makeup to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to go straight down and straight back up. We want to have as little wiggle as possible, and helps to choke up on the needle so that if you have shaky hands like me, you have better control. I'm going to grab a little bacteria. I'm going to take my cap off. Make sure this is all nice and focused. And I'm going to go straight down and straight back up with as little wiggle as possible. You don't have to go all the way down to the bottom. You just have to go a little bit ways in. Sometimes the SimDeeps get made a little thick. That's fine. And you can actually see, I can get this on the camera, my stab line. It went straight down, well, straight-ish. But you can see I had a little tiny bit of wiggle there. So you can see how it's got that kind of two-dimensionality, but if I turn it 90 degrees, that goes away. So you will be able to tell whether or not this was actually inoculated properly when the bacteria grow. All right, so that takes care of those. I'll let Crane here help me with all the other stuff, so you guys don't have to watch me inoculate like another 12 tubes. And then we'll get back with the results after this. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. We'll start kind of running through the different results, and I'll show you guys what everything looks like. We'll start off with the plates for Pseudomonas aeruginosa. So you guys can see here, that nice green coloration for this. Please keep in mind that the bacteria themselves are actually tan, but what ends up happening is they get that green pigment that they produce. And if you guys look really closely, let's see if I can get you guys a nice shot of this. You can see one of those umbonate colonies right there. So see how it's got kind of a sunny side up look to it? There you go. It has an interesting smell. It's a little bit like tortilla chips. It's kind of one of the weird ones that look like that. You guys look at this guy, and it's always best to look at slants from behind. And of course, it's very hard to show on camera. This is actually an effuse one. So you can see that dark center line, and then out from it, there's a spread out line, and you can kind of see the auger on the side. But effuse basically means it's got like that dark center line, and then kind of a spread out line from it. Okay. Broth is just kind of cloudy. That's basically all it is. It's pretty easy. If you look very closely, with the camera to focus, why would I want the camera in focus? It's got little pellicle bits, and I'll try to take a picture with a photo better, but you can see pellicle bits that are floating in there. They're very tiny. And the last one is SimDeep. Now, SimDeep is notoriously hard to read. And one of the best things to do with SimDeep is to have a compared blank one. So the one on the left here is blank. The one on the right is got bacteria in it. And you can see the one on the right has got that cloudy appearance throughout the entire thing. That means it's modal. And I'm actually going to hold this up to the light because that's actually one of the best ways to look at this. So hopefully you guys will be able to visualize this better. So you can see where that stab line is. No camera, there we go. So you can see where that stab line is, but it's cloudy throughout the entire thing. And that stuff on the top, don't worry about it. It's just nonsense. We don't need to look at it. Okay. Micrococcus luteus next. Here's the plate. You can see it's nice, bright and yellow. They're very tiny colonies. They're very flat in shape, but they're usually typically very, very round. So they got a kind of mucoid look to them, so they're slightly shiny or slimy looking. Yeah, that's Micrococcus luteus. For its slant, it creates this very nice, very smooth slant. Now this one, you can see it's got kind of a ridged quality along one of the edges. We call that a cinnulate. Not all bacteria grow the same way all the time, so you got to keep in mind that each time you look at a bacteria, you have to look at it its specific characteristics. It's just not going to grow the way that you want it to every single time, so you can't just say this is the only way it grows, because some things like humidity or temperature or time can affect the way they grow. Another example here, Micrococcus luteus, it's really hard to see, unfortunately, but it basically kind of all sunk to the bottom. It just does not do well in broth. It likes a lot of oxygen, and it just can't really handle broths if there's not enough oxygen in there. And the last one is the Simdeep, which is, again, going to be kind of hard to see on camera. You can actually see it's pretty much just in a line there. Now you can turn it here and you can see that two-dimensionality, and that's just because I did a bad job inoculating it, but when you turn it 90 degrees, you can see that it's very, very smooth and clean. There's no bacterial growth in there. So this tube, the one on the left, is the uninoculated one. You can see that they are very similar, and I'll hold it up to the light here. I'll hold it up the light so you guys can see. So they're both very clear. This one, when you turn it 90 degrees, does have that two-dimensionality, but that's just because of poor inoculation technique on my part. But yeah, you can see that basically the bacteria didn't spread anywhere. That means that it is non-modal. So there you guys go. All right. Next one up is Bacillus subtilis. Here's its plate. You can see it's nice, wide colonies. It's got an irregular shape to it. It tends to spread out pretty flat and wide. You can see it's got a lot of ridginess to the sides. It's what we call a irregular shape. We call that undulate margin because of how bumpy and, unround it is. So it's got a lot of weirdness to it. If we look at it on a slant, a lot of times we will see, if we can get it to focus, there we go, that it's got, so in this case it looks kind of a cinnulate. Sometimes it'll spread out more. This is just an unfortunate amount of time to grow, so it's not enough to really make an impact. But what ends up happening is it'll tend to look like the arborescent. And you can almost see that where it's got the little kind of tree leaves and it's got that wide spread. This one just didn't happen to spread out very wide today, so that's all that is. Broth, just kind of slightly cloudy. It's really not that much. And then it's got some that sink to the bottom. It's really hard to see that on the camera, unfortunately. And lastly is the Simdeep. In Simdeep, you can see very cloudy in appearance. Compared to this guy, you can see that kind of like haze throughout the entire thing. And if I hold it up the light, maybe you can see it a little bit better. So we'll go on a trip one more time. See how it's kind of cloudy throughout the entire thing. It's a little hard to see. It's unfortunate. Camera isn't as good as real life. All right, last one is Serratia marcescens. Now this one was grown at room temperature, and you can see it is a nice, super, ultra, mega, bright red bacteria. If you look very closely to that colony right there, you can actually see that serrate where it's kind of look like teeth marks all along the edges. So that's that serrate, so like a serrated knife. You can see that they're kind of large colonies, somewhat. They've got a little bit of growth to them, so they're rounded on the top. And they grew bright red because they were grown at room temperature. Because remember, they don't do well at high temperatures. If we look at this one on a slant, it'll tend to grow in that acuminate shape where it's got the kind of rigid edges. And so that's kind of how we see it here. If we were to go look at the the broth is cloudy throughout the entire thing. You can see that kind of nice bright pink tinge throughout the entire tube. So there you go. Lastly is a sim deep. Now this one's kind of interesting because it doesn't have as much pink tinge except for at the very top, but the entire thing is quite cloudy. And again, hard to see, but it helps if you have a comparison tube. So you can see that this tube on the right is very cloudy, this one on the left is not. And there's really only red kind of at the top here, so it's not... Okay, so hopefully you guys can see that. It's a little bit more cloudy. And you can see my really bad stab line, which is not straight at all. Turns out it's really hard to do this in front of a camera in a weird position. Okay, but there you guys go. You can definitely see the cloudiness a lot easier with the red right here at the top. It does tend to like to grow towards the surface a little bit. And there you go. That's what it looks like. All right, so that's all of our media. What we'll use with these next is how to make smears, and I will actually show you guys that on the next video. So we're going to go ahead and do that later. All right, thank you.